According to a damning new report from Business Insider, it looks like Marjorie Taylor Greene may be implicated in a possible insider trading scandal emanating from the White House. Per Business Insider, in the hours before President Donald Trump announced a 90-day partial pause on a slew of new tariffs on foreign goods, he declared on social media that it was a great time to buy. One of his loudest allies in Congress had already gotten the message. According to a disclosure made public on Monday, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene plunged somewhere between $21,000 and $315,000 into the stock market on April 8th and April 9th, investing in 17 different companies including Apple, Elon Musk's Tesla, Nvidia, and Palantir. Trump's tariff pause announcement sent markets soaring on April 9th, and anyone who purchased stocks in the final hours or days before Trump's announcement would have seen significant gains. Now, Greene was asked for a response to the allegation and responded that she signed a fiduciary agreement to allow my financial advisor to control my investments. Quote, all of my investments are reported with full transparency. Of course, I suppose the legitimacy of that claim depends on whether you believe that she had zero contact with her financial advisor, which may be true, and it was just lucky and coincidental that a member of Congress's financial advisor happened to time the market exactly right in the middle of an economic collapse that virtually nobody else was able to see. Or, of course, the flip side is that, well, she got a heads up and benefited accordingly. I can't say one way or the other, but perhaps those watching might feel differently. And by the way, isn't it interesting how these Republicans like Marjorie Taylor Greene frame themselves as these working class champions, all the while watching their net worths undergo meteoric increases while they're in office? Estimates suggest that Greene is worth somewhere between $7 and $36 million. How many people in Greene's district do you think see that kind of money? How many of them felt financially secure enough to drop between $21,000 and $315,000 into the market in the middle of an economic collapse? Take all the time you need with that one. Now, AOC had weighed in on this issue a few days ago, perhaps referencing Greene herself when she wrote, any member of Congress who purchased stocks in the last 48 hours should probably disclose that now. I've been hearing some interesting chatter on the floor. Disclosure deadline is May 15th. We're about to learn a few things. It's time to ban insider trading in Congress. Now, the benefit for Greene and the rest of this administration is that there will be no investigation into her actions at the hands of Trump's DOJ, Trump's FBI, and Trump's SEC. But there are two avenues for potential investigation or prosecution. The first one, only with investigative power, is the House Ethics Committee, as campaign finance expert Joe Birkenstock explains here in a recent interview.
The ethics committees have authority over people that are in the body, so you can get fired, you can lose your job, to some extent lose your career. That's rare.
Or
it takes
in the
a
case
lot.
in the case of today's Republican Party, just get promoted up to attorney general or something. Like you get a cabinet position out of this.
Sure. So, just one counterpoint, though, right? The ethics committees are unique in Congress in that they really are bipartisan. There are equal numbers of Republicans and Democrats on each committee, regardless of who holds the majority in the body. And a lot of people point back to the Matt Gaetz matter as one that, despite his role in the Republican Party, despite a lot of reasons Republicans might have had strategically to want to keep him in that seat, ultimately that investigation did result in his departure from the House after years and in a very private way, right? I'm not suggesting that means it's a really satisfying result, but there's more than zero exposure to members of the House or the Senate as a matter of those ethics processes. On the executive branch side, in a criminal sense, I completely agree. You need a U.S. attorney that's willing to prosecute. You need a Securities and Exchange Commission that's willing to investigate. And I certainly remain to be convinced that that's going to be done on a really even-handed basis going forward.
And I know you may be thinking, look, if we're relying on House members to hold other House members accountable, doesn't exactly inspire confidence. But there is another avenue besides that, as Elizabeth Warren explains here.
Think of it this way. Here's Donald Trump out there saying all kinds of stuff. He drives the market way down, goes totally into the toilet, gets flushed, moves through the pipes, and then he changes the whole thing and it shoots way back up.
Right.
Something happens in between those 2 points, and that is right before he makes those announcements that make the market say, yay, fabulous, he's not as crazy as we thought. A bunch of people buy shares of stock, and they buy what are called calls so that they can leverage and buy even more shares of stock on very little money. The SEC ordinarily would just stop and investigate. They say, whoa, is this either insider trading, that is, a few people were tipped off about what was going on, or is it just straight up market manipulation, even if it happens out in public? The SEC would ordinarily do that, but this is now Donald Trump's SEC.
Right.
So that's the real problem we've got here. But let me offer one more thought. Congress doesn't have that kind of access. And yeah, in theory, we could subpoena and so on, but that would take a majority and we're back at the same, right? Just back at the same dead end with Republicans. Doesn't let them off the hook, but it just says, can we keep looking for something that might be more effective? State attorneys general have the same opportunity to investigate, dig in, get what the facts are. So, for example, Letitia James, the Attorney General of New York, which has jurisdiction over the stock market and the trading that happens in New York, might decide she would take a look at this.
And in fact, Joe Birkenstock reiterated Warren's claims. What about enforcement action at the states? Because A, these people aren't under, the jurisdiction of the federal government. They're not guided by what Donald Trump, by any edicts that Donald Trump says down. And B, pardon power wouldn't apply to crimes that were committed at the state level.
Yeah, all correct. I mean, it is complicated. It's not to say that it's easy to enforce this kind of stuff through a state avenue. There are state statutes against fraud. There are state causes of action that a state attorney general could investigate. They will ultimately get into zones around preemption of federal law, right? Under the Supremacy Clause, federal law is the supreme law of the land.
Right.
But there's a long body of law that recognizes states still have a lot of latitude to enforce their own laws, as long as it's not directly conflicting with the outcome under federal law.
And are there statutes that are different enough that they couldn't be, that the federal government couldn't come in and basically Bigfoot the states by saying, nope, supremacy clause applies, we're going to prosecute this, or not prosecute this?
Yeah, in one word, yes. I mean, again, this question of preemption obviously is one that exists across the entirety of the policy zone, right? It's not limited to securities enforcement or anything else. And there is a long body of law that explains, and it states in particular, I mean, I do have some firsthand experience with preemption of the Federal Election Campaign Act, for example. States that enforce their own campaign finance laws typically do not acknowledge preemption of federal law until the Supreme Court issues a final mandate after literally every avenue of appeal has been exhausted. So it doesn't lend itself to a narrow yes or no answer, but in terms of can they investigate, do they have the authority to even start looking under some of these rocks? The answer is definitely yes.
So look, whether or not Green is investigated or prosecuted is obviously another matter entirely, but I think the more pertinent question right now, in this moment, is this. Do you want people in office whose goal is to enrich themselves at your expense? When the market was crashing and your 401ks were getting gutted, none of us had access to privileged information. None of us got rich off the backs of the poor or the working class. I am tired of watching the privileged operate by a different set of rules, and I'm even more tired of watching the privileged pretend that they're not privileged while they continue to fuck over everybody else. Marjorie Taylor Greene, worth millions of dollars and just a little bit richer after this week, is the same as Trump and Elon Musk, both billionaires, all of whom are exploiting our government to make themselves much, much richer, knowing that they control the very people who would be tasked with regulating them. This is corruption as overt as you could possibly find. The Republicans will run for office aligning themselves with the little guy who's getting screwed over, when in reality, they are the ones screwing over the little guy themselves.